when I realized that I was a human trafficking survivor, then I also was like, oh, God has a really big plan for me. And when I realized how many other thousands and hundreds of thousands of Teresas are out there, I'm like, I cannot sit here and let that happen.
Hey, I'm Madison Bertunas.
And I'm Jessica Leap-Fick.
Here's to Speak is really about loving the people who are around you and learning that faith and spirituality can be a normal part of your conversation with them.
We realize that talking about Jesus and faith can feel really awkward and uncomfortable, but we believe each of us can listen, learn, and love people better. We are so excited today to welcome Theresa Flores to the Ears to Speak podcast. And we have been wanting to speak with Teresa today because we realize that human trafficking is a huge problem across the world and the U.S. And a lot of times as Christians, we don't quite know what to do about it. Where can we help? How can we intersect with the stories of women who've really suffered because of human trafficking? So I want to introduce Teresa. And Teresa, you can share a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. My name is Theresa Flores. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I'm a Christian, and I've been speaking about my story for 10 years now. And I actually thought that after 2 years, we could have solved this problem and it'd be all over. And that was very naive of me. But we've been doing the SOAP project, which stands for Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution, for 8 years. And it just has been quite a journey.
Yeah.
I got married a few years ago and have 3 grown kids. So it's been a real blessing to do this.
Wow, that's incredible. I think I first got acquainted with your story through Connie Anderson, who does abolitionist work with InterVarsity in Ohio. And I helped to participate in the anti-human trafficking event they had at Ohio State a couple years ago. And it was incredible to see students mobilized across the city to really do something to fight against human trafficking.
Teresa also has a book called The Slave Across the Street. And in this book, she shares extensively about her story. But today, Teresa, we wanted to hear your story and get your story out there. But I wanted to start out just by giving a little bit of context to your story based on your family background. So just tell our listeners a little bit about your family background, what it was like growing up in your home, and what faith was like in your home.
Yeah, great. So I grew up in what I call just a normal middle-class family with a mom and a dad, just your general dysfunction, nothing major like, no molestation or, anything bad. I have 3 younger brothers. I'm the oldest, the only girl. And I just considered it a good family. I mean, we had our problems, but everybody does. And we went to church every Sunday. And my mom was brought up Catholic and my dad was Protestant. So that was back then considered a mixed marriage.
Yes.
And it did cause some angst between the 2 sides. But my mom got up every Sunday and took us to church, and my dad would begrudgingly go to Catholic church. But we went through our whole, religious education and everything. And I would say that it was a very firm foundation for me. It emphasized very strong that this was an important part of our life, of value, and that you just didn't question it.
Yeah.
So faith was extremely important to me. Even the older I got, like into high school and stuff, I really found my personal relationship with the Lord then. Mm-hmm. And it was a good thing because it's what I was going to lean upon very heavily from then on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were in church every Sunday with your family growing up.
Yep, every day. Yeah. I mean, it's different than probably some other people's experience because it wasn't like Bible study and stuff like that because that wasn't really our strong suit back then. Mm-hmm. But it was still a good influence for me. I mean, I did go every Wednesday to our religious education classes and retreats and stuff. So I would say I was very involved for what some people would consider being a Catholic.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So it sounds like, your upbringing was fairly normal and you found yourself living in the suburbs of Detroit. And when you were in high school, when you were 15 years old, you became a victim of human trafficking for 2 years. Tell our listeners about how this happened.
It was just, I think, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, being vulnerable like every 15-year-old girl is, and making a couple of bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy at my school, a little bit older, who started just paying a lot of attention to me, was just sweet talking, lots of compliments. And I was really starved for attention because we moved every 2 years.
Okay.
I was always the new kid.
That's
so I was always trying to fit in. And he was cute. He was very different than most boys that I knew. So 6 months go by. My parents were very strict. I was not allowed to date until I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am 15. He's asked me out. I can't go out.
Yeah.
And so after school one day, he happened to be by my locker and just asked me if I wanted a ride home from school. So here I am, 15. I have a crush on him by now. And I thought, that sounds pretty innocent. A ride home from school, it's not a date. Okay, this is good. We can do this. And so I really jumped at the chance. But when I got into his car, he ended up not taking me home.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Oh, I just forgot something. I need to pick it up." And I had the instinct, those feelings, that this was probably not a good decision.
Mm-hmm.
But I was already in the car with him.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of stuck, and I still was mesmerized by him. And I thought I didn't want to look uncool.
Yeah.
So I was like, "Oh, it'll be fine. This guy. It's not like it's a stranger."
Right.
So we ended up going to his house, and he asked me if I wanted to come in. And I said no. I said everything I was supposed to say. But then he was just like, "But I like you. I like you." And I thought, well, that's not, I was like, okay, great. That's nice. But I didn't think anything bad would happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it did. He drugged me and raped me that day and then took me back home.
Mm-hmm.
And the other bad decision that I made was that I didn't tell my mom.
Oh, wow.
I was embarrassed. In our faith, it was very important to be a virgin when you got married.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was very much emphasized to me. And it was really important to me. And I didn't want my parents to see me as dirty.
Yeah.
As different. But I said, I'll just keep this to myself. It'll be okay.
Because you were a virgin
But
when
that
this
was
happened?
I was a virgin, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I kept it to myself. And then, it just got worse from there.
Wow.
So this happened to you, and then you go back to school the next day, that week, you see him again. So what happened after that?
He approached me with an envelope, and he said, my older cousins want me to talk to you. They were there as well, and they took these photos. And they have a plan, and that plan is, unfortunately, that you're going to earn them back.
Mm.
And if you don't do it, there are consequences.
Yeah.
Showing them to my father, to his boss, to people around school, to our priest. And so in my 15-year-old head, I thought, I have to do what they say to get these back, you know?
Yeah. So he's basically blackmailing you and saying, I'm going to reveal all of this to your family. As a 15-year-old, you're thinking about your reputation and just being humiliated. But you thought, I can make this end. I can make this stop. But it didn't stop. It kept happening over 2 years and really got worse. Like, what happened after the blackmailing? Like, were you able to earn the pictures back? How did it progress?
Eventually, I would get one or two back, but there was just so many, by the end of this, there was just no way. But I naively thought, I can earn these back. I can do this. But I think that hope is what kept me alive. They would demand that I come out several nights a week, and I would sneak out, and they would take me to homes all around Detroit where men would buy me. And they would take me back home around 3 a.m. And then I would go to sleep and get up for school the next day.
Wow.
So it was a vicious cycle that I had no idea how to get out of.
Yeah. And obviously, like you mentioned, you were kind of trapped in this shame of, if I tell anyone, they're going to think poorly about me, which is something so common for victims of abuse or rape, that you start to believe this horrible thing about yourself instead of the fact that you're a victim and are being oppressed. So this nightmare kind of continued for 2 years, and you didn't share with a teacher or a parent or anyone. You're just in this alone, living this nightmare of going to high school during the day, being trafficked and raped by multiple men every night. So what was the tipping point where you were able to get free from this cycle?
It was really, really just the grace of God is the only reason that I got free and that I'm really still alive. I was taken by these group of men one night and basically kidnapped and drugged. And then the car stopped in this inner city, Detroit, nasty motel. And there were so many men waiting for me. You couldn't even see the furniture in the motel room. And that night I was just basically used over and over until I passed out. And the next morning I woke up with like no clothing, no shoes, no money, no identification, no idea where I was. And here I'm like 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what to do. It wasn't like I could just simply pick up the phone and call my dad and say, hey, come get me.
Right.
He thinks I'm asleep in bed. He thinks I'm asleep in bed right now.
Yeah.
You know, and just like I didn't want to disappoint them.
Yeah.
Like you said, the shame was so huge. I found my pajamas and I just started walking around the parking lot. And I really think that's when God intervened. I walked into a little diner and this waitress saw me. And she said something to me nobody ever said, no teacher, no parent, no friend, nothing. She said, can I help you?
Wow.
And it was just the simplest thing. And even then I said, no, I'm fine.
Wow.
And it was just like so silly. But luckily she didn't believe me. And she called the police and they took me home. And at that moment, things started to change. I mean, even at that moment, I still couldn't tell my parents what happened.
Yeah.
I still couldn't even admit it. But luckily, my dad got transferred 1,000 miles away within a few months, and we were able to escape.
Okay. So this waitress saw you wandering around. She said, can I help you? And then brought you back home to your family or reconnected? Like, how did
yeah,
that
brought me back to my family.
Okay.
I mean, like today, that would be different. They would probably would have taken me right to the hospital and, you know, done a rape kit and stuff like that. But this is, you know, 1980 something. Yeah. So they just took me home and then had a conversation with my parents. And, you know, and that was that.
What was that like for you and your parents? I mean, to have to tell them, here's what's been happening for 2 years.
They didn't know. I didn't tell them. At that moment, I was in shock. They assumed I was out, you know, partying, and I just let them assume that. I don't think I had the words. I didn't have any words to explain.
Yeah.
I knew that if I spoke, that all these threats that they had threatened me with for, you know, a year and a half would come true.
Yeah. Threats like hurting you, hurting family members. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's so much that strikes me about your story and what you were going through for those 2 years. So you were living in fear on a day-to-day basis, fear of what's going to happen to me today. Am I going to get my photos back so this can end? Fear that if I reach out for help and try to get out of this nightmare I'm living, is my family going to be hurt? Is my reputation going to be hurt? You are living in this constant state of fear, which also breeds a lot of trauma. So you were living in trauma because when you finally did have that help and that woman saw the need that you had, I mean, you were still not able to even speak the words because you were doing this alone in this trauma. And something else that strikes me about what you went through is you were taken to homes in the middle of the night of other high school students. And you would be in their parents' basement and the parents would be upstairs and they had no idea what was going on under their roof. And your parents had no idea what was happening to their daughter. And your teachers at school had no clue what was happening to their student. And so if that was true for you, that's still true for a lot of women today. And so coming from your experience, Teresa, what is the message you want to send from that?
That if you see something, say something, you know, to anybody. You know, I know there was teachers, and in my book I talk about, you know, the security guard or the teacher that saw things happening and just didn't want to get involved. You know, when I would sneak out at night, I would be in my pajamas and barefoot, and it'd be around midnight, and I would be running through my backyard, through our neighbor's yard to wait for that car. And what makes me angry is that the neighbor guy, you know, would be sitting in his living room watching TV and see me run through his backyard. Wow. And he never said anything to my parents. Yeah. Even if it was like, hey, you know, what's your daughter doing? I need to tell you something.
Yeah.
You know, that could have ended it for me.
Wow.
But he clearly saw me, and, you know, no one's up to any good in his situation like that.
Yeah.
And he could have really helped me. So that is really my big message, is that this can happen in any neighborhood. You know, it doesn't matter how much money you make or how good of a family you have.
Yeah.
And that, you know, there are signs. We all see something, and we need to do something about them and not just assume somebody else is going to step forward.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned that, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of a good family you came from, what socioeconomic neighborhood you live in, the color of your skin. I think a lot of people don't realize the pervasiveness of human trafficking today. Can you just share a little bit about what that looks like in the US? Because I think sometimes people tend to think, oh, that happens over there in underdeveloped countries or poor parts of the country.
Or it looks like that movie Taken with Liam Neeson.
Or it happens, you get a kid snatched out of a playground or things like that. But your story is one of a friend, a crush who really groomed you to lead you into this horrific situation. So share with our listeners kind of what trafficking looks like in the US today.
Yeah, I mean, it's the second leading crime right here. I mean, people think that, oh, this is the second leading crime, but over in other countries overseas. But no, it's the second leading crime here in the United States. And that shocks people because we're not hearing about it on the nightly news.
Right.
And that's really what we need to do. 65% of all trafficked survivors got trafficked because of somebody they knew.
Wow.
Because of an older boyfriend or a girlfriend that grooms them or a neighbor. So that's a big piece of it. So it's not like the movie Taken.
Right.
You know, 65% are somebody that tricks them. 35%, a third of all trafficking victims in the U.S. are trafficked because of a family member.
Wow.
So a family member selling them. Americans think I just have to protect my kid from being kidnapped. It's like, no, it's far worse than that.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah. And you had mentioned earlier that you were in church every Sunday growing up. So here you are, this American church going girl sitting in a pew. And the people in your church had no idea. And so
they went to church with me too. They were
the men did.
Oh,
yeah,
my gosh.
So there's another spin. There are perpetrators in churches on Sunday mornings. You know, they're everywhere. But just to focus in on the shock of that being in our churches for our listeners who go to church every Sunday and the rest of us, what are the warning signs we need to look for?
And it's hard to tell, I will admit. I mean, a change in behavior is probably a good indication where someone's really happy and just outgoing and stuff, and then all of a sudden she's withdrawn and jumpy and doesn't talk very much. That's a really good indication. A girl that's hanging around older guys and they're not hanging around her girlfriends anymore, and then starting to party with them. The older guy is buying her lots of expensive things, running away. Girls are starting to run away. But it's hard. I mean, that could be anything. So it definitely is very hard to tell.
Yeah, which kind of makes it all the more important that we should be aware of these things because it's subtle, and it could be the person in our church, the neighborhood, the friend, the uncle, the girlfriend. And I'm sure your book details more about what this looks like to spot the warning signs, and your organization, TraffickFree, as well, I'm sure has ways that people can become more aware of what to look for and what to say. I think, like you mentioned, it's heartbreaking that people will see something and not say something because they don't want to be nosy or, you know, get somebody else's business. Or I think, frankly,
what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong and it's really not that? But it's like, well, what if you're right? What if you're right? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you shared that eventually, once you were brought back home by the waitress, your family moved away from the Detroit area. You moved 1,000 miles away. Were the perpetrators ever caught, or did they try and pursue you, or how did that all end?
Again, truly the grace of God. We moved so far away, and I didn't tell any of my friends an address where I was going. So really, I basically think it was untraceable where we went. So they never came after me. And I just really spent those couple years just trying to heal and piece my life back together and forget about that as best I could.
Yeah.
You know, I finished my senior year of high school and then I went on to college. But I will say it was not easy at all because I was holding this secret, this really, really dark secret that nobody knew, that I didn't have words for, and I felt all alone.
Yeah.
You know, and so It was really difficult.
Mm.
Yeah, but they were never caught. By the time I figured out what had even happened, like some words, I tried calling the police and they were like, we can't help you. It's too late.
Yeah.
And the statute of limitations was over. So I kind of like to say that this is my justice. This is how I get back, is by, getting God's army together to fight it now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
How long, Teresa, did you keep that secret inside?
So the first time I told somebody a little bit about it was a boyfriend that I had in my senior year of college, because I didn't want to tell him, but the flashbacks were coming on too fast and things were I couldn't sleep. And so I just told him a little bit about it. And he actually has a chapter in my book as well, just about how I acted, where he knew something was wrong, but he, obviously I wasn't speaking about it.
Yeah.
So, but he was the first one, and that went really well. He was very supportive of me. Then I didn't tell anybody until a few years later. I told my parents a little bit about what happened. And then after that, I didn't tell anybody for 20 years.
20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, your first sexual experience as a virgin was being raped. And then, I mean, that influences any sort of relationship with men and women and sexuality moving forward. And so what did the path of healing look like for you? Because you could have continued to stay in shame. You could have continued to not say anything to anyone. But, even as I'm listening to your story today, I'm thinking how painful this must be to keep telling this story and to keep reliving these things. And I mean, people who haven't found healing can't tell their stories. They can't come back to it because they haven't experienced healing. And so you obviously have. You're doing something about it, not just telling your own story, but helping thousands of people across the country. So what did that path of healing look like for you from coming out of shame?
Well, I mean, I will say that I wasn't healed for a very, very long time. And healing is not a destination. It's a journey. Yeah. Every day is different. It's not someplace you're going to reach and be good with forever. Yeah. But I did end up in a very abusive relationship, which is very typical, because I wasn't healed and I didn't feel worth anything better than that. I was in a relationship for many years, a marriage that was very, very unhealthy. And it wasn't until really the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, I have a plan for you. And the kind of like the rose-colored glasses came off, and I looked at myself through Jesus' eyes.
Wow.
And that changed for me. I got divorced, and I became a single mom of 3 kids, and never looked back. And that really started my healing for good. And when I realized that I was a human trafficking survivor, like those words together were like fit me, then I also was like, oh, God has a really big plan for me. And I always knew he had something planned for me. He does for everybody. But it was at that moment I realized that I wasn't the only one. Like all these years, I thought I was the only one that this kind of thing had ever happened to.
Yeah.
And when I realized how many other thousands and hundreds of thousands of Teresas are out there, I'm like, I cannot sit here and let that happen.
Yeah.
And so I started sharing my story little by little. And it's funny because I run a support group in Michigan every month. And we were doing a research project for a lady, and there was 10 of us there. And 8 of them, she had said, how did you come to know that you were a survivor, and how did that start for you? And 8 of the 10 of them said it's because I heard Teresa's story.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, it was. And, it's like, wow, God really did have a plan for me. So, but that has helped with my healing. Obviously that's like really to see others now gain their strength.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Teresa, you've mentioned your faith and seeing yourself as worthy in Jesus' eyes. And so I'm curious to jump back a little bit and ask you about your faith when you were going through the trafficking for 2 years. What did that do to your faith, and what was your relationship with God like during that time?
I don't know if I'm any different than anybody else. I've really never asked any other survivors that question. But for me, my faith did not wander. It did not wake at all. It was just as strong as before. Now looking back, I don't know if I realized this then, but I realize now that like these guys owned my body. They took over my brain and my mentality, everything.
Yeah.
I couldn't be a good student. I couldn't be a good daughter, a good sister, nothing. But I think that I refused to let them take my relationship with the Lord.
Wow.
And that was all I had. You know what I mean? That was like, I didn't stop going to church. I think that instinctively I knew that I had to hang on to that with everything that I had.
Yeah.
Otherwise I would end up dead.
Yeah.
And we see that in women that just give up. They say, okay, I'll do this. I'll get addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
I'll work in the strip clubs, and then my life is over. And I think instinctively that I knew I better hang on to the Lord with everything I had, and I did.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, like you said, so many women choose a path of death, of addiction, or continuing the pain of being exploited. But it's incredible to hear that you didn't walk away from Jesus, that you ran towards him in the pain and the horror and the trauma. How does that affect how you talk about Jesus now and live out your faith now? Obviously, you're a messenger of hope to women who are in trafficking or who are survivors. So how does that affect how you talk about Jesus?
I really see him now as my father.
Mm-hmm.
And even like when you know how like you're a kid and you go through things that a father is a very important figure.
Yeah.
And so now as an adult, I can really, and it's hard sometimes for people, especially women that have been abused, to see him as their father.
Yep.
And again, especially so many women have been trafficked or abused by father figures. Yep. So I see him personally as my father now. And even more importantly than that, I see myself as his daughter.
Wow.
That's even more important, and that he wants the best for me and that I am worth that.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it now. And that's why my message to others is we do a lot of retreats for survivors.
Sure.
And that's my favorite thing to do, even more than the soap outreaches. But because I want to show these women by example that you can have a healthy relationship, but you got to have the Lord in it with you.
Yeah.
I guess I've progressed in my relationship like we should all with him.
Mm-hmm.
So when was that turning point for you, Teresa, when you realized I am a daughter of God? I am worthy of his love, and I'm worthy of healthy relationships with other people as well. Do you remember a time when that was a turning point for you in your first marriage?
Oh yeah. I mean, you remember that exact moment of something like that. I was laying on my bed and I've been married 9 years, and just horrific day. And I was reading the Left Behind book, the very first one.
Wow.
I remember right then, like, just closing it, and I'm like, he didn't want any of that to happen to me. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want me to be abused by this man. I deserve all the riches of the world and to come. And so I was like, this is it. I'm done.
Just like that. A Left Behind book.
Like that.
Gave you hope.
Yeah, the Left Behind book, number 1. Yeah. As cheesy as that sounds.
No, I mean, I love
Tim LaHaye would love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible how God will use anything to help us know.
Yeah, song, whatever.
Yes, just how much we are loved by him unconditionally. So.
Yeah. And it's funny because there'll be moments like this is tough. I mean, what I do, I travel and I share my story so much, and I talk with other survivors and look for missing kids, and it's hard. And it's always funny how there'll always be something that'll bring you some clarity, like a song or whatever, will hit you and just bring you right back to the right path.
Yeah. So. It sounds like it is hard work, and just hearing about these things, this is so dark. It's so evil. There's so much brokenness. It's overwhelming. How do you turn to Jesus to help you persevere and stay hopeful instead of, depressed and hopeless or fearful?
Or coping with drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, coping and numbing out is too hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, luckily, the Lord has put in my path an amazing man, my rock. Our anniversary is in 2 days.
Oh, congrats.
And he came into my life, like, right when I was starting this. Like, it was not a chance,
Wow.
And really has been by my side through it all. So that's definitely been, and then some great support systems, great friends that are all, I can pick up the phone. I'm like, I had a crappy day. I need some help, and they're always there to pick me up.
Yeah.
So that's good. And then, the stories, the emails I get from survivors, that just reconfirms every day that I'm doing what the Lord wants me to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it easier some days, but
yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that is a huge encouragement to know you have a safe, secure relationship that you can pray with your husband or your friends, and that women too are reaching out and saying, I found freedom because of your story of freedom. I think this is such an important message, especially for Christians to hear, because a lot of times people think that faith and justice are two different issues. You know, they see things like fighting against human trafficking as, oh, that's the justice ministry, and that doesn't have anything to do with the evangelism ministry. So how would you help communicate to people that these things really go hand in hand?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, all of them do. I mean, how can you speak justice if you don't have faith? How can you spread the word of Jesus if you don't have faith? And that is just, I mean, it all is the same thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be much more productive in any one of those three things that you just choose if you have all three things.
Yeah.
So, and it takes all of them. I mean, you have to have strong faith and a strong support network when those days when it does get dark. One of the things that we've noticed is really important in this movement is level of protection, you know, getting some really good, strong prayer warriors.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be working with survivors. You don't have to go out and hit the, you know, streets and do street outreach. You can just be a great prayer warrior for all of us. And that's so needed because we get attacked over and over again. And sometimes I feel really bad for my friends and my family because I'm like, I chose to do this, but they didn't choose to be attacked. And so realizing that that is a real thing and that it happens, and then surrounding yourself with strong, powerful women and men is super important in this mission.
Yeah. I love that you pointed towards prayer, just that the work of prayer is so crucial and important for survivors, for the fight against human trafficking, to have that connection with God, to know that he can keep giving you love and he's ultimately the one who will bring justice. So
yeah, it reminds me when you said before, when you were talking about your faith going through those 2 years, and you said that those men took your body and they took your mind, but you wouldn't let them have your soul. And Jesus, we see time and again in the Bible that he always spoke to the whole person. So as a survivor of human trafficking, someone can't tell you that your faith is separate from what you went through and that these things don't go together because they all connect. And that's what you're doing now. You are giving hope to women and saying all of these things in your life connect and matter. Mm-hmm. And so you've mentioned your organization briefly, but could you just tell our listeners exactly what it is that you do in your organization?
Sure. It's called the SOAP Project, SOAP. And like I said, it stands for Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. And I started it because of what happened to me in that motel room. I actually, 8 years ago, was asked to speak in Detroit. And I had vowed when I moved that day I would never step foot in Michigan again. And yet the Lord was like pointing out all these reasons why I needed to be back in Michigan. I wasn't happy about it. I'm like, really? And so, like, no. And so I went back to Michigan and I shared my story with a group of amazing women. And on the way home, I got lost. And I had a flashback. I had a really bad moment. And I got angry at God. And I was like, you know, I'm being your dutiful daughter. And then now I'm getting lost, really. Like, I was really
in Michigan, of all places, right?
In Michigan, right? And I was like, nah. And so I decided I would cut a deal with him. If you get me out of here, I'll do anything you want. And he revealed to me in that moment that I needed to do more than just talk about this. I needed to do more than just share my story. Because people are sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've never heard about this. What can I do? And I didn't have anything to tell them besides pray and give money. I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
And so at that moment, he really revealed to me that we need to help these girls in their worst moment, which was mine in that motel. And so the Lord revealed to me this plan about putting the hotline number on SOAP and giving it to hotels for free all across the country where these girls were ending up. And so 8 years we've done that, and we've given away more than 1 million bars of soap.
Wow.
People can help. I consider it God's army because a family can come with their 9-year-old kid and their, you know, whoever. And we've had 88-year-old men come and label soap. and give it away, and they feel like they pray over it, and they feel like
Yeah.
maybe she will have that, get her hands on that one bar of soap, and it'll change her life. And it has. So that's just an amazing thing. We're gearing up for the Super Bowl in Atlanta in end of January. And that is the #1 child sex trafficking city in the United States.
Atlanta.
There are over 400 hotels in Atlanta. So we have a big job, but we have a big God, and we know that we're going to get this done.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I started doing a couple years ago is really trying to restore the survivors, because they look at me and they think, oh, she speaks, she does this. And I'm like, it has not been that easy, because I've been by myself doing it. So my retreats are mind, body, and soul.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, you got to have that piece. And we try to help them heal, just guide them a little easier and support them, because most don't have that support.
Yeah.
So
for our listeners who live in Atlanta, do you take in volunteers for this Super Bowl outreach you're going to do? And what is that like?
Yeah. It's on the website, on the soapproject.org website. They can volunteer. They can come sign up to come and help us label soap and get it out. And we do outreaches. We have 25 chapters around the country that do soap continuously.
Yeah.
For other big events.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sure any convention, any sports event, I mean, if this is happening at the Super Bowl, it's likely happening for other smaller venues. So yeah, to be able to get those bars of soap with the human trafficking hotline, the helpline, it's great to know that our listeners across the country could find a way to get connected with the local chapter to help out. So
Teresa, Jessica and I were watching a couple of interviews that you've done in the past, and something that you said in one of your interviews really struck me. You said that you travel around and you speak and you share your story. And you said that in every zip code, there's a woman that has your same story. And you'll have a girl come up to you, at the end, and she'll either give you that look in her eye without saying it, and you'll know she's been through the same thing, or she'll say, like, that's my same story. And so just to close out, I mean, can you just give us a picture of what that does to you, and tell us, what's motivating you to keep going to these dark places that you've experienced yourself?
That's what keeps me going, is talking at a high school and a boy coming up crying and saying, this is happening to me right now. And the teachers saying, oh my God, we were going to expel him tomorrow because he's been acting out so much, and we didn't know, we had no idea. Just opening that door for them to get help. I went to an inner city high school, and 3 girls came forward saying this was happening to them right now. And that's just the 3 that came forward, And no matter how tired I get, no matter how hard this is, or how many attacks I get, it's those moments, that make it all worth it.
Yeah. Because
I felt so alone for all those years. And it doesn't make it easier knowing that there's lots of me out there.
Yeah.
That makes it really hard. But to know that I can possibly help them on their path and make them be not so alone as I was, I mean, that makes it all worth it to me.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, we hope for those of you who are listening that you've been encouraged by Teresa's story today of healing and perseverance and faith, that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. We'd love for you to check out her book, The Slave Across the Street, and her organization, TraffickFree.com, where you can learn more about the SOAP project and get involved to help girls in your cities have a chance of getting free from human trafficking. Thanks so much, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Ears to Speak today, a podcast sponsored by Stonecroft Ministries. If you liked what you heard, please go right now and subscribe.
Do it. Just subscribe it. Also, if you have feedback, questions, comments, suggestions for what you want to hear in the future, check out our Facebook page, Ears to Speak, or shoot Madison or myself an email at connections@stonecroft.org. We hope today that you were inspired to listen, learn, and love people better.